Welcome again, all, and surprise! I finally made it! I was hoping to get this out last year, but procrastinating got the best of me, and just trying to record in an introverted environment is not easy to do around here. But don't worry, Sonic X Shadow Generations is still on the way and is nearing completion at the time of this video's release, but that story can wait for another day. Because today we're focusing on another blue mascot, Mega Man, and perhaps one of his most obscure mainstream titles out there. Mega Man ZX and Mega Man ZX Advent, a set of two released on the Nintendo DS, a spiritual successor to the Mega Man Zero series on the Game Boy Advance. Like I said, I consider this to be one of the franchise's most obscure, with it being one of the lowest selling titles and the lack of external media aside from mangas. It's a strange case because in spite of it all, they've become one of my favorites to revisit. But why is that? Are they secretly underrated and truly one of the best games in the series? Or are they just guilty pleasures? Well, stick around and find out. This is the Mega Man ZX series. The 2000s was a different time for Mega Man. A time when Capcom kept cramming the Blue Bomber down everybody's throats with stuff like the Battle Network series. The X series continued with X6, a bunch of remix and re-releases, and of course, Mega Man Zero, a quadrilogy of action platformers starring Inafune's true love. These put more emphasis on story than any other, alongside placing combat and precision at the forefront of the gameplay. The result was phenomenal, with titles that could stand toe-to-toe with some of the best, even reaching a conclusion for once. As we know, however, sales speak louder in the business boom, so Inti Creates was tasked with continuing the style on the DS. However, this would be the second time Capcom would do this, as Zero 4 was never intended, and even after killing the guy, they didn't care. They wanted a Zero 5, or what the team ended up doing, making a whole new game. So conceptualization of a new series began that catered to a younger audience, while still drawing in Zero fans with a familiar look. A lot of the same team came back together for this one too, even if production was rather messy. Regardless, a year later on July 6th, 2006, Rockman ZX was released. Now that we got the establishment shut down, let's get into the game proper. I'll be looking at these courtesy of the Legacy Collection. I would have looked at them via original hardware, but I only own a physical copy of Advent and no capture card, so I'll stick to this. Rather than being a continuation of Force Ending, ZX is more of an epilogue to the loose ends of said game, and a prologue to the new story. Sometime after Ragnarok had been destroyed and a new order was set in stone, a mysterious artifact emerged from the remains of Wile's battle station. Researched by the new resistance, the Guardians, formed by CL, would go on to study the artifact, later labeled as Model W. However, in time, a man by the name of Serpent became obsessed with researching the biometal and stole it for himself to discover its power. In order to combat this potentially dangerous threat, CL created 6 biometals based on heroes from the glory days, Model X, Z, H, F, L, and P, all of them being based on Mega Man X, Zero, and the 4 Guardians of Neo Arcadia. In the present day, the protagonist enters the scene. Before starting, you have a choice between 2 characters, Vent and Ale. Both of them have slightly unique stories and minor gameplay differences. Because I didn't feel either one warranted 2 playthroughs, and for the sake of being more interesting, I picked Vent, so I will refer to the character as such. Vent and his boss/father figure Jiro, in the process of transporting an elusive package to their client, are attacked by Mavericks, and during the scuffle, Vent ends up merging with the package, that being Model X. With this newfound power, he fends them off, running into the client and the new leader of the Guardians, Prairie. She informs that him and Jiro, revealed to be the keeper of Model Z, are chosen ones. People that can mega merge with biometals and harness their power. In which, you guessed it, Serpent is Model W's chosen one. The man is still alive and kicking, with 2 Replit siblings accompanying him, Prometheus and Pandora. Vent and Jiro try to fight back, but the attempt ends with Jiro losing his life. So in an hour of desperation, Model X and Z combine with Vent in order to match Serpent's strength. And the story kinda pauses after that. For a majority of the game, nothing major happens in between stages. I mean, you obtain the other biometals and learn more about them in question, but it doesn't really advance the plot in any way, it's mostly just backstory. Things don't start moving again until Guardian HQ is raided, and even after that, the plot stops again, picking up once we reach the end. Ultimately, this is just how the game's story is though. It's not terrible, and there's certainly dimension to these characters, but it isn't anything remarkable like its predecessors. Hell, this is on the same bar as 0-1. Not a lot happens there either. Now, remember how I said I played as Vent? Well, it's largely considered within the community that his qualities are far lower than Ale's. But if you really nail it down, these two are literally the exact same. Now, it is true that Ale's campaign is better. In fact, I clearly see why. Ale's has more substance to the ongoing story. As she learns new things about the world and its history, so do we. Thus, her script feels more complete due to getting to know these characters more. Vent's story mostly covers the background of the time between 0-4 and this game, which would be all well and good for a new player, but for veterans, it would feel like yesterday. However, in retrospect, his campaign is completely serviceable and not as bad as some people make it out to be. It still covers most of the basic information laid out in the other. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are stupid writing choices like Jiro lying to Vent about always having Model Z, but really the biggest issue I have is that they should have highlighted more on what happened after 0-4. I think that would have given the story added value for both casual and veteran players. You get one story that develops the present, and one that explains how the world got to how it is now. I do also prefer his ending for Serpent's speech alone. So that's my stance on why I stuck with the boy character. Plus, I don't know how you guys do it, but I can't play the game listening to. As for the game itself, however, if we want to start somewhere proper, then let's talk about the presentation, and yeah. This game is a joy to the eyes. It's a continuation of the sleek art style from Zero and the large color palette from the PS1 X games, a great balance. To accompany this wonderful setting is the crunchy sound design and, of course, the soundtrack. It's not my favorite, hell, I like the sequel's OST more, but there's still so many bangers across the board with Greengrass Gradation, Misty Rain, Trap Factory, Wonder Paranorma, and so many more. And do I need to mention those animated FMVs? Thanks to the Legacy Collection, they're upscaled, and even on the DS, this would have made any person back then shit themselves. Definitely a contender for the best looking Mega Man game. And if you play the game in Japanese, there's voice acting. It's kinda quiet against the music like it's Sonic Adventure 1, but it does add more life to the already average plot. I'd imagine there was an English dub planned, they just never got around to it, how troubling the initial recording was. With that out of the way, let's actually begin. In a Void, Mega Man ZX, for all intents and purposes, is more of the Zero games. You can shoot from a distance or slash anything that stands before you. I say in a Void because almost none of the major mechanics from those games is present in this one. There's no cyber elves, no sub-weapons, no ranking system, and to that extension, no EX skills. In fact, I'd argue this is more of an X series game than a Zero series game. I mean, you start with Model X, you collect life ups and sub-tanks and stages, you obtain extra ability from bosses and they function like some of X's special weapons. The opening stage from X1 is recreated almost shot for shot in Area D. Jiro gives you Model Z, similar to Zero giving you his weapons in X1 and X3. Serpent might as well be Sigma Reborn, down to the design and boss pattern. Now, is this inherently a bad thing? Not at all. Those games are equally as iconic. But it's a massive curveball when you consider the fact that it's intended for those who loved what Zero offered. Precision is not the appeal this time around. Instead, the defining element of ZX is the biometals, which give you multiple playable characters at the push of a button. You start with X and then it's replaced with ZX, pretty much doubling as base Zero with the rolling jump slash. Afterwards, you get the remaining 4. All of these have their own mobility and attacks that the game makes great use of. Model F is your power form with the ability to shoot up, down, or even customize the trajectory. Make them zigzag or go downward to hit the targets out of reach. You can also charge these punches that can destroy walls and knock enemies away and release a shockwave akin to X1's charged fire wave. Model P allows you to throw a bunch of kunai, cling to ceilings, or toss a shuriken like the shield boomerang in. Yeah, it should come to no surprise that this is my least used form. It isn't horrible or anything, it's just I never got much incentive to use it outside of situational purposes. Model L is your underwater form where you can swim indefinitely and deal good damage with a lance. Not much else to it aside from being great at what it does. But above all, the best of the four is Model H to absolutely nobody's avail. You got a multi-directional air dash and infinite glide in that overpowered tornado that makes mincemeat of health bars. I say best of the four because it really didn't replace ZX for me, but once you start playing around with them, you'll realize how busted these forms are with Overdrive. This ability doubles the damage of the Guardian models, making some bosses killable in less than 5 seconds. Seriously. Even without that, your default forms are also overpowered with the Rolling Slash, which ignores iframes, or Model X's double charge shot. All of these powerful options at hand does beg the question, however. If all the biometals kick ass 6 ways from Sunday, how are the bosses? To start simple, the bosses in this game are very memorable challenges that test your acrobatics in combat. The Model W siblings and the final boss are definitely the highlights as their patterns are very complex, and they're the most difficult. However, to talk pseudoroid battles for a second, these aren't your typical Mavericks, and that all comes down to the ranking system. When you kill a pseudoroid, you get a level something victory, and you'll notice how the biometal you obtain just has a small amount of special ammo, especially with a level 1 rank. Well, you simply need to kill the other one. However, even then, you may still have a pitiful amount of energy. This is where the weak point comes into play. In order to have a complete bar, you have to obtain a level 4 kill without striking the weak spot. Otherwise, you have to invest energy crystals to repair them. Now, Model H allows you to see it, usually being the head or something, and if you hit it, the health bar will start flashing red. And the more you do so, the worse it gets. So with this system, you get a whole different kind of replay value that you never got from the Classic or X series. Needing to play much more patiently and practicing to know the best times to deal damage in a precise manner is mighty satisfying, and doing so will allow you to have a complete model right off the bat. If you want to see some really insane plays on these, then check out Magnus Zero's videos on the matter. They're impressive watches. Go check it out when you can. That dude just kills it with that shit. So far, I've had nothing but positive things to say about the gameplay, and, well, yes, they are great qualities that I think go overlooked by most players. However, these next few points are when the game starts having very questionable results. Another way the devs tried upping the ante was by making ZX a full-on Metroidvania. Zero One sort of had a structure like this, but it was purely done for upgrading and grinding without your rank being affected. Now the world is fully interconnected and you must manually travel to locales. However, the way it's integrated feels archaic, even by 2006 standards. This comes from two factors, starting with the mission structure. This is such a conundrum because for some baffling reason, you can only have one mission active at a time and you have to manually activate that mission. Across my many playthroughs, this has screwed me over so many times. I've had runs where I forgot to activate the mission and have to run all the way back to a trans server to do so. It's simply annoying. Which is a segue into the biggest problem, the world design. I think the overall level design is good and has interesting ideas, like the power plant having these electrical currents you need to avoid and the lava field having this lava flow you need to escape before it catches up and incinerates you. This is not the problem. It's the way they went about connecting these places. First off, the in-game map is totally worthless. Everything is crammed into one space with only a letter to distinguish that particular area. Second of all, the game never tells you where areas are, and where they are is absolutely nonsensical. Like, why is an amusement park connected to a nuclear weapons laboratory and only gotten to through a forest, which also leads to a marine city and the remains of Ragnarok? How? I would absolutely recommend using a guide for your first few playthroughs because the game ain't qualified for being helpful. This is the biggest fundamental flaw of ZX that hurts it a lot more than you think. It's not only alienating to casual and veteran players alike, it's also inexcusable as Metroidvanias were already an understood thing by this point, with titles like Castlevania Sympathy of the Night setting far better examples than the Zelda 1-esque disgrace of a map. Now, once you've played the game enough, you know what to do, so it could just be a first playthrough issue only, but that does not excuse it for being as clunky as it is. Even some of the trans servers are suspiciously designed, like some areas you can't even teleport to because the trans server, for whatever sickening design rule, lacks the teleporting function. May I ask, why? I cannot think of a single reason why they make this design choice. It's sad because most of the areas are well designed and have all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a Mega Man title. If it ain't broke, don't fix it is the best way I can describe most of the stage design. I say most because Area L can outright suck it, like, this is some X6 type activity right here. Another thing I take issue with is the lack of things to collect in this world. You have the life ups and the sub tanks, but other than that, there's data discs, which don't really tell you anything noteworthy about the characters, enemies, and NPCs. There are energy crystals too, but they're almost worthless after upgrading all the biometals aside from needing to play the minigames in Area C. Now, there are chip upgrades that you can get from side quests or just talking to people at the right time. They even changed it as to where you can stack them all of them at once. That's cool, but a bigger problem is that collecting most of them doesn't really matter in the long run, because ZX lacks a New Game Plus feature. Well, on the subject, the side quests are also pretty garbage. I didn't play most of them because the sub-tank side quest told me everything I needed to know about them. In fact, the only other side quest that I did was for the rest of the chips, which suffer from the same issues. They're long, boring, and repetitive. To mention the sub-tank quest again, you have to visit the worst area in the game 6 times to grab the same collectibles with the final 2 revisits being copied and pasted from the 3rd and 4th. Not even the Area K sub-tank was that miserable. But to go back to positives, there's a bunch of stuff to do after you complete the game. The first time you beat the game, you're offered a harder difficulty, which to those who thought the game wasn't hard enough, here you go. Tank hitting enemies and upgrade absences be damned. On the other hand, after completing the game, there's a couple secrets waiting for you. An extra area past Area M, where if you have the cartridges or enable the link mode, you can fight 4 of the bosses from 0, 3, and 4, including a secret fight with Omega Zero further down the area, and this is the Omega that was meant to be. He's extremely tough and he will test everything you have, but man is the reward worth it. Once you've beaten him, you can play as him and do about everything he can. They even added a little detail of the dialogue portraits accommodating Model OX. Final unlock is being able to use Model X for future playthroughs post Model ZX, and much like Model O, just watch in awe as you shred through the opposition with the double charge shot. You can also spend energy crystals on these minigames that are genuinely entertaining. Except for the soccer minigame, fuck that. Man, Capcom always fails to impress with Mega Man combined with soccer. And with that, we finished Mega Man ZX. I honestly believe this is one of Mega Man's most underrated titles that deserve more credit than it gets. The biometals are great, the bosses are decent challenges combined with the rankings, and on their own, stages were all well and good. The story may not be of the same caliber as 0, 3, or 4, and the world design is no excuse being as convoluted as it is, but with enough time, it can be worked around into something fun. So considering everything I've talked about so far, it seems like this was a slam dunk for Capcom. I mean, it's a sequel to one of, if not their most successful sub-series at the time. How could it not? It was even received rather positively. So what happened? Why are the sales so low? Well, I'm gonna save that for later, as what we'll be talking about next is partially crucial as to why these games are forgotten. Despite the lower sales compared to the Zero games, Capcom still gave the okay for a sequel, and a year later, that's exactly what we got. On July 12th, 2007, said sequel was released and known as Mega Man ZX Advent. ZX Advent is often considered to be the inferior of the two for a multitude of reasons. However, when I played the game, I was kind of surprised by that. Full disclosure, I didn't think Advent was as worse as people said. I actually think it might be better. What? Having said that, I shall explain why. Now before we start, for this run, I actually played as both characters, as these two have far more differences than Vent Ale in the last game, and as a sequel, it does expand on the previous, so a bigger adventure is expected, such as the game's story, which I'll try to combine in this summary. Advent isn't a direct continuation of the last game, rather, it's a whole new set of characters, although the loose threads left in ZX1 are tied in this one, like who are Prometheus and Pandora? Who's he? And what's his game? So deep in the mysterious lab, a group of hunters are infiltrating the place in search of something. Instead, they come across a capsule containing a sleeping Reploid. But before they can do anything about it, they're killed in an ambush. The boy is awakened by the fighting and has no recollection on who or where he is. However, it doesn't take long for Pandora to attempt to dispose of the kid, referring to him as Gray. Gray attempts to escape at the mysterious lab, but he ends up falling to his doom. Meanwhile, high in the sky, another group of hunters attempt to board a fleet carrying a biometal, planning to make a bounty off of it set by Legion. One of the hunters, Ash, leads the charge to take it before being stopped by Prometheus. Both characters are rescued and brought to the hunters' camp, going on a train ride to Legion for specific purposes. Once again, they're ambushed by the Model W siblings and nearly killed until the mysterious biometal, known as Biometal Model A, mega merges with them. Before taking their leave, Prometheus decides to let Gray and Ash participate in the Game of Destiny, a game where Mega Man clash to see which one is worthy of becoming the Mega Man King. Once they save the train, the Sage Trinity of Legion contacts our heroes to repair the train and deliver the biometal, and thus the journey begins proper. 2 stages in, they encounter the other contestants in the Game of Destiny, Atlas, Thetis, Aeolus, and Cyranoc, all of whom seem to have taken possession of the 4 Guardian biometals. They leave the 2 alive for now, but it's only a matter of time before Gray and Ash kick their asses later down the road. When the train is repaired and our heroes arrive at Legion HQ, shit suddenly starts to go down. It turns out that Master Albert had been controlling the Maverick outbreaks and is the creator of the Model W. His goal is to manipulate the Game of Destiny to gather pieces of the Model W and form the Ouroboros to reset the world. Gray and Ash attempt to stop him, but are a little too late as Albert makes his escape. The 2 must then make it their mission to track Albert down and defeat him, and after the 4 Mega Men are taken care of along with more pseudoroids, the 2 encounter a much older and experienced Ven Ale from ZX1. The 4 then team up to put a stop to Albert's plan, and after a bit of Maverick busting, Gray and Ash infiltrate Albert's undersea volcano, to which Prometheus and Pandora murder their master. Fueled by their centuries-long hate, the 2 hasten the destiny of destruction, attempting to destroy their protagonist, only for that rage to fully power the Model Ws and awaken the ultimate biometal, Ouroboros. All hope seems lost until Ven Ale shows up again with a plan. Using the Guardian base as a way of boarding the Ouroboros, they raid the place and stop Albert's shenanigans. With the threat of Albert gone, Gray and Ash look towards the future with their newfound destinies, parting ways with Ven Ale. So it kinda goes without saying that in comparison to the first game, yeah, there's far more going on with the story in this one. It helps that the campaigns have completely unique interactions based on the character of your choice. However, this plot is still steps behind the Zero series for a very simple yet very critical issue. ZXA's plot has really cool ideas that aren't fleshed out enough. The biggest instance is undoubtedly the Game of Destiny, as the concept of selected people forced into battle to determine who is the most righteous ruler sounds very interesting. And the 4 new contestants are very interesting characters. In a way, it's almost like the Hunger Games, but Mega Man. However, the other Mega Men never at all fight or have conflicting ideologies with each other, which is strange because with what their goals are, I figured there'd be at least some sort of dispute between the 4. Even then, a team-up would still defeat the purpose of a one above them all type of scenario. Another thing I found disappointing that was never elaborated on was the Model W's origin. Regarding its creator, Albert is a far more compelling villain than Serpent ever was, but we're not really told why he made a biometal based on, the cruelest dictator in the entire franchise. It feels like a missed opportunity that Albert doesn't care to mention the idea behind Model W. But that really paints light on how the Zero series is kind of forgotten about by this point, which is even more apparent in the gameplay department. And if you're wondering, yes, I did play through expert mode and saw the secret ending. It's obvious that it was going to tie into Legends, and by technicality, we already know Master Thomas won. But it's still a damn shame this hasn't been resolved for, 17 years? Prometheus and Pandora, though. These 2 are the best characters in the duology, and this game absolutely needs to elaborate more on what their deal is. By adding on the audio dramas, we understand that they've been tortured by Albert for centuries and despise him for it. Using their own siblings, Gray and Ash, the 2 plot out their revenge, and their defeat is rather poetic. I'm hoping that for a ZX3, if it ever comes out, make these guys the playable duo. And considering how the game ends, there's a potential setup for it, so why not go for it? Ven Ale also needed way more screen time than what they got. It's kind of weird how the two have control over almost all biometals, have little significance in the sequel, and they don't really do anything until the final act. Moving back towards the good, I've got some things to say about the protagonists, being that they're far more distinct than Ven Ale ever were. To start off, Gray is the typical amnesiac who's out to search for who he really is. In that summary alone, he's not a very standout protagonist, it's a very substandard idea for a character, but what gives Gray intrigue is the twist on his amnesia. He thinks there's something waiting for him to be uncovered about himself, but it turns out he's just a shell for a failsafe in case Albert's plans fall through. His journey is less about jogging his memory and instead a nobody who shapes an identity for himself and his alone. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, Ash isn't like any other protagonist we've seen before, with their greedy and tomboyish attitude but still knowing when to take it seriously. Suffering from an identity crisis, she decides to make a name for herself. Both protagonists have the same ordeal. It's just that Ash's backstory is completely unspecial. Nothing about her origins has nearly the same amount of nuance as Gray's. In fact, it's the most cliche thing ever. Her being a descendant of Albert isn't stupid, it's just lame. It's the bare minimum for a twist, and also her dialogue doesn't make sense in some parts. They even mistake one of her lines for Model A, that was funny.
Hey! You mean that Model W made all of those Mavericks?
I do like Ash, and she's my preferred choice, but her story definitely needed more fine-tuning. Also, whoever mocks the booty quotes, you're a coward. Don't tell me I'm enjoying Ash wrong. The presentation is still on the same caliber as ZX1. The graphics are still pretty, even if most of it is from the first game. The animated FMVs are back with more flair, sound design is crunchy, and with that, the OST slaps. Originally I was gonna say ZX was my favorite, but I definitely don't agree with that anymore, especially since I'm not a fan of the remastered album. But for ZXA, I love both renditions. It is now my second favorite in the franchise. I dig the nostalgic feelings these songs give off. Drifting Ice Flow, Flashover, Bullet Drive, In the Wind, Terminize, Trap Phantasm. Again, so many bangers. To cap it all off, the game features a full English dub, and it's...
Stay back! Get away!
I've had it! Do you think I'm just going to sit here and let you two kill me when I don't even know why?
All right, I'm gonna hold you to that.
I'm going to go ahead and meet our booty face to face.
Yeah. In spite of X8 and Maverick Hunter X already being out 2 years prior, we're back to square one with this game. This cast consists of a few members from X7 and a bunch of random people they pulled off the street. Doesn't help that the voice director from said game returned for this one. You can automatically tell because these actors sound like they have no idea who they're playing and how the hell they're supposed to read their lines. Part of me feels like it was definitely a compromise made on budget, as there are a few things that ring a little thin compared to the Japanese original. Once in a blue moon, in-game voice clips aren't dubbed, and a lot of the game actually goes undubbed. Not to mention, because of how dialogue is formatted, it feels like the script was cut into chunks and not complete sentences. The Japanese dub doesn't have this issue at all because of how Japanese is written, but they seriously couldn't cut the voice lines properly? Like, what was going on? But, playing devil's advocate for a moment, though, this might be the best non-Ocean group dubbed Mega Man game. It's commendable for having the Legacy Collection uncompress the dub so it's much more clearer to listen to, but I think the casting works for the most part. For the main heroes, Ash's voice actor is at the very least trying. I feel more sincerity from her performance than Gray's. Peter Von Gomm clearly didn't take any notes from voicing X, so we got the same whiny performance as before, and it still isn't great. I like Ven Ale's voices pretty equally, the 4 Mega Man do an alright job, excluding Thetis. However, the best performances come from the main villains. Rumiko, who played Aelia in X7, returns as Pandora, and I gotta say, she does a decent job as the nihilistic witch. And Jack Merluzzi, my god, his performance as Albert was golden, which is shocking considering his performance as Zero in X7. However, the real star of the show isn't even him. This game's got Splash Warfly's actor Ryan Dries as the legendary Prometheus. I truly love this character. Everything he says is insane.
To be defeated by the very first Mega Man you ever made! How fitting for the scum that you are!
I've built up this mentality where I always have this stupid grin on my face whenever he shows up on screen because I can tell his actor was just having a ball with the role. Putting aside the discussion of voice acting because I've been at it long enough, the presentation remains relatively the same as ZX1, and while it reuses a lot of assets, they rearrange it in ways that feel fresh. Anyway, finally time for the game itself. ZX Advent picks up where the first entry left off. You jump, you shoot, you collect biometals, you use said biometals to traverse the world, you accept missions, manually travel to locales, do side quests, it's all there and accounted for. Unlike the first game, there's quite a few notable differences between the playable characters. Gray is more traditional as he shoots faster pellets than a regular charge shot. Ash is the reverse. She shoots slower but has bigger lemons and this amazing reflect laser from 03 that is almost guaranteed to hit your targets with good aim. It should come as apparent by now that Model A doesn't play like Axel. However, it still invokes the spirit of being a well-ranged fighter with the homing shot ability. On top of that, you also get the Giga Crush ability, which isn't versatile outside of bosses since it costs the entire ammo bar to use, and it may not work the way you want it to. It's only a matter of time before you get the other forms back though, and oh man, talk about a glow up. The 4 Guardian biometals have all seen a tremendous boost in utility. Because you don't get ZX until way later, the game encourages that you use the other biometal forms, and this gives them way more mileage than previously. Model F can straight up replace your default form with how effective its attacks can be. Model H is great for getting up close, and once again, it's an aid in platforming. Even stages go out of the way to have challenges designed for them. Model P got some more creative uses outside of the rare dark rooms, and Model L swimming sections have more going on than just a straight shot to the end. There's so much to do with these. Some I just figured out by complete accident. Did you know that Model F can destroy the highway stage mini-boss's saw blades and knock it back? Model H can let you skip an entire section of Scrapyard's maze with a well-aimed plasma cyclone. Experimentation is a key to fully understanding the ZX series, and Advent is no exception in this regard. However, my biggest complaint with the biometals in ZXA as a whole stems from a fundamental flaw that is the culprit behind what alienates most veteran Zero players: the combat. This is one of the most common criticisms of the game, and it's not hard to see why. The game's balancing is just way out of curve. For starters, the overdrive mechanic has been cut entirely, which seriously breaks them down a lot. Model P especially, as the kunai only deals 1 point of damage, and you have to wait for iframes to end before firing another one. Although weaker attacks are only 10% of the equation. The biggest hurdle to overcome is that the special abilities are split between characters. So that means only Gray can use the Shuriken Boomerang or Groundbreaker, and Ash can only use the Ice Sticker. Further exemplifying the issue is how Gray is given pretty much all the good ones and Ash is left hung to dry with not as desirable options. The Ice Sticker is one of the most inaccurate weapons in the entire series, and Model P is borderline ineffective without the Boomerang. It gets even worse when Model ZX is thrown into the equation, as unlike the last 4, you get the entire package. No moves are spared between them. You have everything plus a returning EX skill, Rising Fang and Fission respectively. And of the two, Ash finally gets the better end of the stick with the former because it's great for coverage. Still, why is it that you get all of their benefits, but not the other 4? This rule breaker not only makes the other 5 forms completely obsolete, as it's not only powerful, but you don't have anything to lose or gain from picking one over the other. This system just baffles me, and trying to put my thoughts into words about this is equally mind-numbing if you couldn't already tell. And all of this could have been fixed if they just gave you the complete benefits for all models. It's frustrating to think about how this one change would have made Advent definitively better than ZX1. Since you copy bosses instead of obtaining them utilizing Model A, the game goes the extra mile and allows you to transform into the Pseudoroids, which are not that great. Their attacks and mobility are pathetic, and not to mention that their utility mostly amounts to upgrade fodder. Now, make no mistake, there are a few that are useful in certain situations. Chrono Force can slow down time, which makes challenges more comfortable, and Queen Bee can just straight up fly. Everybody else, go lay down. Try as you might, but getting something out of the Pseudoroids is next to impossible, as they usually only serve a single purpose. Their best attempt was Buckfire, as he's almost just as mobile as your default form and has good speed. And the rest? Rospark, I only used to get sub-tank and it's required in the early game. Argo and Ugoil, sub-tank. Bifrost, sub-tank. You see the problem here, right? I mean, to the game's credit, it's less intrusive compared to Axel's copy shot. In X7, it was not worth using at all, and in X8, it just felt like a pointless gimmick. Who wouldn't like the idea of having 16 unique characters at the push of a button, or in this case, the bottom screen? And despite the poor execution, these forms don't really get in the way of gameplay, so I'm not as critical of them as I used to be. Well, that was quite the tangent, but take my word for it, from here on out is when I've got nothing but positive things to say. In spite of the A-trans and the combat system, ZX Advent actually improves on a lot, starting with the Metroidvania elements, and I'm happy to report that this is something that was heavily improved upon. Just by comparing the map to the original, you can already tell which one is more useful. Areas are much more organized and distinctly labeled by a proper name, color, and image. It's also always displayed at all times on the bottom screen with most forms. If that didn't tickle your fancy, there's now these teleporters that you can set up with 100 energy crystals that you can warp back to at any time via the transfers. You sadly can't use them as an exit, but this does cut down backtracking by a lot and stages are much shorter in length this time around. And when talking about level design, not a whole lot changes between ZX1 and ZXA. It's got all the same notes you expect from a Mega Man level. Although I'd say the low point would have to be the scrapyard if I had to pick one. It's full of troll doors, falling debris, and this annoying maze at the end. I'm pretty good at this section now, but it's still a drag, especially on expert mode. Every other stage, however, for as linear as they can get, is well constructed and has more unique set pieces than ZX1 in some instances. The biggest improvement, however, has to go to the side quests. To tell you the truth, I'm shocked. ZX8 provides far more unique side quests than before, with most of them being fairly enjoyable. The sub-tank quest is miles better than the original by having you collect classic series memorabilia like the balancer and the L-tank all in one area. I love the quest where you dig up the tunnel in the hunter's camp to create more rooms for an E-tank cafe, a chip upgrade, and just to customize it. But what helps most of all is that both main and side missions are automatically active and you can have as many as you want. The bosses this time around are so much fun to throw hands with. The Mega Man are definitely the highlights as it feels like you're fighting another player, especially in Model ZX's case. To make up for the lack of a ranked kill since you don't obtain biomedals this time, you instead get medals by defeating Pseudoroids under 3 certain conditions. Some are fairly simple, like finishing Chrono Force with a charged ZX Saber or defeating Queen Bee without summoning her Hornets. Or they can be complete wastes of time like all the Argoyle and Ugoyle missions. It's not terribly challenging to get them all, but it is time consuming nonetheless, and the reward isn't really worth it. More on that in a second. Much like ZX, you're offered a harder difficulty after beating the game, and this one does not screw around. You have limited resources once again, but stage hazards change on top of bosses. If you thought the game was too easy, this is the mode for you. However, you also unlock mini-games by meeting the same requirements. There's Quiz Advent, which is everybody's favorite, yeah right, and Mega Man Antique, a retro throwback to the classic series with authentic music, graphics, and mostly handling. I don't know man, it feels like this rendition has a lot more weight and feels overall slower than classic Mega Man. But this is still such a neat mode, and fun fact, this is actually the basis for Mega Man 9, so that's interesting trivia. You can play as the 8-bit Gray and Ash after obtaining all boss medals on a new file, though to be honest I don't really like it that much. Its damage output is pathetic and the lack of a dash really stings in a game that's designed around it. It's nothing compared to Model OX, cool as a novelty, but not much else. Much like how you got Model X, beating the game as both characters unlocks another minigame called Survival Road. It's basically a gauntlet against all 15 main bosses. You only have your transformations and 2 full sub-tanks to rely on in this mode. None of your health or weapon or chip upgrades carry over, and there's no checkpoints. So every time you die, you go all the way back to Buckfire. This mode is the ultimate test of skill, and it is very satisfying to complete. After clearing it, you can fight the bosses individually, but just so you know, they're all locked to their expert mode difficulty, so watch out. And that is Mega Man ZX Advent. In spite of it all, and disregarding the combat system in general, I seriously believe this is a solid game that is honestly rather overblown with hate. Hell, I actually find this better than ZX1. It has huge problems, but what it does good, it just does so good. The story is far more interesting, the world was heavily refined, the side quests were great, the presentation was still on the same caliber, and the stages and bosses were all better than they ever were last time. If you're looking to get into the Zero and ZX series, you start with this one. It's not as tough as 0, 1 through 4, and it's not as confusing to solve as ZX1. As a Zero Series game, it falls very short in comparison, but from the perspective of a one-off, you can find more appreciation in Advent, because it really is just classic Mega Man greatness. And come on, that is a good thing. Then Capcom devalued the hell out of its return 3 years later. Yeah, these days, sadly, I'm sort of doubting the return of this series, as Inti Creates and Capcom haven't been in touch since Mega Man 10. I don't know the full story, but I'm pretty sure they fell out because of disagreements on a scrap Mega Man 10 multiplayer aspect, among other things. And it doesn't help that Inti could be under death by association from Capcom, since they were one of the developers behind Mighty No. 9, and we all know how much of a disaster that game is. Given its failings, I'd imagine Capcom wouldn't be interested in hiring them again for ZX3. Hell, they weren't even credited in the Legacy Collection. Assuming Capcom doesn't have the full rights to ZX, I won't keep my hopes up, even if I really want that third game. For what we do have, however, I believe these games deserved a second chance, and they got that with said collection. Not only do these two serve as epilogues to Zero, but these games are also just fun. It may not be as dark and intense as Zero, and they're not really going to top them. However, it never needed to be Zero in order to be good. ZX yearns to be something different from the norm, and while the attempt needed fine-tuning at first, they got to near perfection with Advent. A fun game is all I'm looking for, and both of these fulfill those expectations in spades. Between the two, and as much of a controversial statement as this may sound, I'd say ZX Advent is the better game. Its combat may have been nerfed hard, but regarding the gameplay loop and the story, I find it to be a much more rewarding experience. Not to devalue ZX1 or anything, I love this equally as much, and it does have qualities that the sequel doesn't, but the Metroidvania elements are simply too complicated for its own good. Again, I want to hope that one day the fabled ZX3 is revitalized so that this story can finally be concluded. But until then, I'll remain content with these two hidden gems. Next time I see you all will be with Sonic X Shadow Generations. Spoiler alert, this masterpiece devalued the hell out of the Superstars review. But that's for next time, and all we have for today's video. Thank you guys for watching, have yourselves a fantastic night, take care.